Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and in this follow along, we're going to be learning all about provisioners. So what I want you to do is make sure you have a new folder and cd into that folder, and we are going to create ourselves a new main.tf file, and we're going to go set up a new workspace in Terraform Cloud. So I'm going to choose the CLI-driven way of doing it. I'm going to call this workspace provisioners, okay, and we're going to get some default code here that we can copy in. So I'll just paste that into my main TF. That's just going to set up that workspace. We want to set up our environment variables or our Terraform variables again. So we'll need to set up that for AWS. So I'm going to just go to the registry here, registry.terraform.com or .io. And we'll go to AWS here, documentation, AWS providers, scroll on down, just because I can never seem to remember these key names. And so we will put in this one here. And I will need to actually get my credentials. Again, these are secret, so you should not share these with anybody. Again, I'm going to get rid of mine eventually here, especially before I publish this course. And I should be able to paste that in there. Didn't get it. It's very finicky, the copy paste here with VS Code. So we'll mark that as sensitive. We'll add another one here. And in this case, it is called secret access key. Okay. And we will save that. And so we're all set up for AWS, with the exception that we need to define our actual required providers. Again, we're going to go back to, well, we don't actually have to. We could just go grab it from here. If we go back here and grab the required provider there. And so that needs to go just after backend here. Doesn't matter the order as long as it's in the first level of the Terraform settings. And we'll also want to specify the provider. And I'm just going to set the region here as US East 1. And it's double quotations. I don't think Terraform supports single quotations. And then I just need an AWS instance. So what I'm going to do here is go up to my getting started here. And in here, we're going to grab it from the AWS code. And we'll just scroll up. And we'll grab this. OK, but we'll have to make some modifications because we don't have a local here. So we'll take that out. And I'm just going to hard code this value for the time being. So T2 micro. And that looks good to me. I'm just going to double check here. That is all good. So we'll go down below, type in Terraform Init. Great. And that's just going to start setting up that for us there. So the thing is that we're going to want to SSH into this machine. And so we're going to want to set up like a data key, okay? And so the way we're going to do that is we're going to need to use, it's called AWS key pair. So what I'm going to do is make my way over to the documentation here. And I'm just going to type in AWS key pair. Okay. And this is pretty much what I'm looking for. So I will go ahead and paste this in. If you're familiar with AWS, you can, associate keys, but this is the easiest way. So we're going to need to generate our own key and attach it there. Once we have our key in there, we can just reference it. So I'm just going to go down here and add it right now. So we'll go key _ name. And I think what we'd want to do is use an interpolation there or a directive. And we'd want to do AWS key pair .deployer .key name. Okay. And I'm just looking at that to see if that is correct. The coloring is not right here, but I don't think that's why, that is the problem, because the syntax definitely looks correct to me here. So I guess I'm just not going to worry about that right now. Another thing we're going to need is the public ID. So again, with the outputs, we will just type in output and do public ID. IP, sorry, I like to say ID. And we'll set our value here, AWS instance, my server. Okay, so we're going to need some kind of SSH key. So we're going to go ahead and generate ourselves a new one. There is a Linux command called Ssh Keygen. It's basically the standard for generating out keys. And so I'll just hit enter here, and I'm just going to call it Terraform. And I'm going to hit enter and enter again. And notice that it has generated out in the root.ssh directory. Actually, it might have dumped it right here, and that's no good. I'm going to delete that. The reason I can't have it in this folder is that I'm right now mounted to a Windows directory, and so chmod, which is what we need to modify the permissions, won't work if we do that. So I'll have to do this again, and I'll have to type the full path. Okay. And so this will generate it out in the correct directory. I'm going to do a chmod on that, 400. The reason why we're doing that is that whenever you launch an instance, I'll show you later, but if in Sessions Manager, but AWS will not accept like a key unless it has it's only readable. Okay, so we will go here and do .ssh Terraform and put on the 400. We don't need to do it on the public key there, and we need that public key, so we'll do root.ssh terraform.pub. We're going to copy the contents there. This might take more than one go because the paste in VS Code is not great. Double check the ends here. Make sure there's no spaces. That causes a lot of issues. Check the front here, SSH. That looks good to me. Okay, and so when we deploy this instance, it's going to take that SSH key and install it on the server for us, which is really nice. So we need to now set up a security group because we're going to need a way of accessing port 80 and 22. So back on AWS here, we can go to the top here, and if we just type in security groups, I never can remember if it's under EC2 or AWS. If we go down here, there is the security group. And so here is where we have an example. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this in here. And we're just going to go ahead and modify that, okay? So I'll just paste it right here. And I don't need any tag on that. And so we have our egress rule, we have our ingress rule. And so for ingress rule, we want one for HTTP because we're going to install Apache and just have it running on port 80 here. Okay. We're going to be using our default VPC, and so that doesn't have an IPv6, so I'm just removing it out of there. And we're going to have to reference some kind of VPC. So for the time being, like we're going to use an external data source. We'll have to change that, but this will be, we'll call this SG my server. SG my server. We're going to have to set our description here. So this will be my security group. My server security group. Notice that we are explicitly setting an egress port. If you're familiar with AWS, this is usually set for you by default, but when you're using Terraform, you have to explicitly set it because if you don't, it won't be there when you deploy it. So we're going to need to have that VPC, and so we just need the ID, and we could technically just open AWS and grab that key. So if we go over to AWS here and go to the VPC and go to VPC IDs, we could just technically grab it. That's the default VPC. But the problem is we're going to probably have to refer to this VPC in other places, so we can't just grab the ID and put it in here. That's not going to be good enough. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to actually reference the existing. We don't want to set up a new VPC. We just want to use the default one. So that's where data sources come into play. Data sources allow us to externally reference resources. And so like if I wanted to figure out how to reference a VPC, I would just say Terraform, data source, VPC. Okay, and then I should be able to easily find an example here. So here's an exact example that I want. So I will go ahead and grab that. It's very simple. I'm just going to call mine main because that other one was called main. And this is where we would want to actually place the ID. So I'll go back here and grab my VPC ID. Okay, and so now this actually acts as a resource and we can access all of its attributes. So that's going to be very useful. Like notice how we're referencing CIDR block. If we had just hard-coded that VPC ID, we wouldn't be able to do this, which is what we need. So just make sure the egress, we don't need an IPv6. Well, we can just leave that alone. That's fine. So what we need is to reference this here. So we'll say data.aws VPC. Notice that we're using data dot in the front because it's a data source. That's how we always reference them. And we'll just do .id. Down below, this has to be data because it's not a standard resource. It's from a data source. All right, and that is good. So we have our data source. So that looks pretty good to me. Oh, but we have to reference the security group actually down below here. Otherwise, it's not going to work. So I think for that, it is VPC security group IDs. And then there, that's where we'd have to reference that. So our resource up here is called AWS Security Group SG My Server. So we'll just have to type that in again down below here. So we'll say AWS Security Group .sg my server .id. And that should apply. We didn't actually create a port 22 here, so we'll go here and copy this. And we do not need, we don't want the CIDR block of the VPC. This is what if we want this to be the internet. So we're going to say 0.0. I'll just copy the one down below here just so I don't make any mistakes. But this just means from anywhere. Okay. And we only want our IP to work. So what we'll do is go to the internet here and type in what's my IP. And so that is my current IP. I'm going to go here and make a CIDR block. /32 just means use a single address. And I actually put that in the wrong block here. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste it up there. And we're going to go and clear that out. And so that will give us access. Well, I think I messed that up. Sorry. So one's supposed to be down here. So we want the SSH to be our IP address here. So sorry. We'll say SSH, port 22. And I gotta go back and copy this one here because I just cleared it out by accident. Okay. And so we have that port 80 open, that SSH open. The only other thing that we need is a file to configure our resource. So what we're going to do here is make a new file. I'm going to call this userdata.yaml or maybe cloud-init.yaml because we'll do userdata.yaml. But this is basically Cloud-Init. When you're using AWS, this might vary per providers, but you have to start the first line as cloud config, even though this is a YAML file. This is important for AWS to know what to do. I want to install HTTPD. Okay, and I'm going to do run cmd, systemctl, start HTTPD, and then we have to do sudo systemctl enable HTTP. So this is going to install Apache, which is just a web server, start it up and enable it so on reboot it will work. One thing I want to show you, if I have not before, Cloud-Init examples. If you're just wondering, like, how do you know what to write there? There's a bunch of examples on Cloud-Init. And then notice like it starts with that. So we could literally create users and do all sorts of things here. But for our purposes, we're just going to keep it really simple. I don't know if it matters if it's a YAML or a YML. Sometimes you have it with the A, sometimes you don't. But I'm just going to do it that way anyway, like that. So we just need to set our user data here. So we're going to have to pull in that script. So we will type in, we'll need to reference our data. So we'll need to create a new data source, and this is going to just be called template file. We'll call it user data. And here we'll say template equals file. I think I called it Cloud-Init here. Oh no, we renamed it user data. There we go. And so now we just need to reference that file. So if I go down below, and we say user data equals data template file, user data, and then I think you have to type rendered there. So this will deploy a server that's open on port 80 SSH, only allow it on our address to SSH into it. It's going to copy over that key, and it should run this script and install Apache so we can see that server, and we'll output our public IP address there. So I'm going to do a Terraform plan to see what happens. Because we did do a lot there, right? See if it takes it. I don't even know if we did Terraform Init yet. If we didn't, it will complain. So it says here, a data source AWS VPC ID has not been declared in the root module. It's probably, no, we're doing data, right? So that shouldn't be an issue. Main. Oh, I didn't write the word main on there. So that's on line 29. So I think we just need data here. Or sorry, main. Okay. And we'll try another Terraform plan. And sometimes if you want to speed it up, you can just type Terraform validate before you do your plans. That's why you see me do validate a lot without doing a plan first, even though they both do it. Okay, and so what we're having here is an error where it's saying inappropriate values for egress. So description, prefix, list ID, security group, self are required. So when you're specifying things in blocks, even if they're optional, sometimes like blocks being this, sometimes you have to still specify them. So we don't have prefix ID. So we should go look this up because I'm not sure what it's expecting here. So we'll go down here to prefix ID. Okay, so that's just a list. So I'm going to go here and just provide it an empty list. Okay. I have a feeling that's for ingress, egress. And it wants security groups. Right there. It's also a list. Okay. And then self, that looks like it is what? Whether the security group is added by the source or not. I think that's a Boolean. So what I'm going to do here is do security groups. Self equals false. It's not like I know what these mean in granular detail. It's just the fact that it's like, hey, we want these fields. And I just go and I go, okay, I'll give you some defaults. Because I don't plan to use them for anything, right? So, and we will paste that in there. There's some weird characters there. Okay, so we'll go down here and do Terraform Plan, and we'll see if it likes it now. I don't know if we're missing a description here. We are. So description. Outgoing traffic. Try this again here. All right, so we didn't get any errors. It looks like it's all good and it will provision. So the AWS root module does not declare a variable named AWS access key ID, but a value is found in the Terraform TFRs. If you meant to use this value, okay, that's fine. So what we're going to do is now try to provision and see if it works. I'm going to do auto approve. All right, and looks like it's off to the races. I will see you here when it's done, okay? All right, welcome back. So after a little while there, I just wanted to make sure those two checks had passed. We're ready to see if our server is working. And by the way, there is a way for us to make sure that Terraform only completes when those two checks have passed, and that's where we can use null resource. And so we'll look at that later on, but for the time being, we'll just manually check that stuff when it's done. So what I want to do is go grab that public IP address, go and paste it up here, and look, where our Apache page is working. So everything is working as expected. Let's see if we can SSH into that instance. So what we can do is type in Terraform outputs and see what we have here. It might just be output, my fault here. And so notice that, oh, we get a lot of stuff. Okay, so I just want, I'm not sure why I'm getting so much output here. All I want is the public IP address, but notice that it's giving me a bunch of stuff here that doesn't make sense. So I must have made a mistake here. If I go down below, yes, I forgot to do public IP. All right, so what I'm gonna try to do here is see if I can do a Terraform refresh and see if that, well, actually, sorry, Terraform refresh is an old command. So I'm going to do refresh only and see if we can get that change to reflect. Refresh only is like we didn't change any infrastructure, but our state does not match our like the actual objects within the cloud. So this way we can just pull that information, okay? Refresh doesn't always work as expected, but in this particular case, I think it should work pretty well. Yeah, see, it's going to replace all that information with just that. And we're going to type yes here. Great, and so now if we do Terraform output, it should be a lot more sane. And if we just want to get that single one there, whoops, we can do public IP. But what I want is I want it in raw because I want to be able to use it as a bash command so I can SSH in. So I'm going to do ec2 user $, parentheses here. And I'm going to do -I to specify where my SSH key is, my public key, or sorry, my private key, I suppose. So we will do SSH Terraform, and so that should allow us into the server. That's much nicer than having to type the IP address every single time. I'm going to type in yes, and I'm in the server. So there we go. So we successfully provisioned with Cloud-Init. The other way to provision is with Terraform and Packer, but we'll leave that for the Packer section. Yeah, that's all we need to know for Cloud-Init. So there we go.